If you were waiting for the 6:45 a.m. bus on a freezing Tuesday in February and saw a beat-up cardboard box sitting alone on the bench, taped shut but trembling just slightly, what would you do? Most people didn't notice. The wind was biting, the sky still gray from a long night, and everyone just wanted to get through their morning commute. Gloves clutched coffee cups tighter, eyes stayed fixed on screens, and the shuffle of boots on concrete drowned out any hint of something unusual. But Evelyn Carter, 72, noticed. She always noticed the things other people missed. Maybe it was the loneliness, or maybe just the habit of paying attention to small things after losing everything big. Since her husband Frank passed away last October, her mornings had become hollow routines. Wake up before the sun, dress in silence, ride the bus with strangers, and pretend to belong somewhere. That day, something was different. She felt it the moment she left her apartment. The stillness was heavier, more meaningful. The streets looked the same, and the air was just as sharp, but her chest carried a pressure she couldn't name. When she reached the bench, she saw the box right away. It wasn't much. Just a soggy, duct-taped container like the ones used for moving shoes or old books. But it wasn't discarded beside the trash bin. It was deliberately placed on the seat, like someone had wanted it to be found. Evelyn paused in front of it, narrowing her eyes behind round glasses. There was no label, no writing, no sign of what it held. But there was a feeling, like something inside was waiting, not just to be seen, but to be understood. She sat down slowly, her knees aching in the cold, the same way they had every morning since the arthritis settled in last year. The moment she lowered herself onto the bench, she heard it. A faint rustling, like fabric being dragged against cardboard. Then a soft, strained meow, more breath than sound. Her chest tightened. No one else reacted. A teenager scrolled on his phone, a man in a suit checked his watch, a mother adjusted her child's scarf. But Evelyn leaned in closer. Her breath fogged as she gently tapped the side of the box. Another meow, this one weaker. She didn't want to get involved. She told herself it wasn't her place, but her hands were already reaching for the tape. She peeled it back carefully, years of experience with brittle things guiding her fingers. The top flaps creaked open, and the moment she looked inside, the world around her disappeared. Nestled in the box was a scrawny adult cat, dark gray with patches of lighter fur, its coat matted and damp. Its eyes were wide but tired, like it had stopped expecting kindness. But that wasn't what took Evelyn's breath away. Clutched gently between the older cat's front legs, wrapped in what looked like a torn piece of plaid fabric, was a tiny kitten, barely moving. Its fur was so thin it looked translucent under the weak light, and the older cat was shivering, not from cold alone but from exhaustion, as if it had been protecting the kitten with everything it had left. Evelyn's throat tightened. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. A memory slammed into her like a wave. The hospital room, the silence after the doctor left, the feeling of holding her stillborn baby wrapped in a blanket too big for such a tiny body. She had never talked about that day, not with Frank, not with anyone. It was a pain buried so deep she thought it was gone. But now, staring into that box, it surfaced with brutal clarity. Her fingers trembled as she reached in, instinctively drawing the flannel around the kitten, cradling it closer. The older cat didn't resist. Its eyes simply met hers with a quiet, haunting trust that cut through every defense she'd built over decades. The bus pulled up behind her with a hiss of brakes, startling her back to the present. The others began boarding. The driver gave her a nod, waiting. Evelyn looked up, then back at the box. She was supposed to ride 2 stops, go to the small community center, sip coffee she didn't like, and pretend she had something to wait for. But she couldn't leave now. Her heart was wrapped around that box, tethered by something deeper than logic. The bus driver gave a final honk and pulled away. Still, Evelyn didn't move. She just sat there, arms wrapped around 2 lives the world had discarded. She inspected the fabric more closely now. It was an old flannel napkin, worn thin and torn along one edge. Folded under the kitten's head was a scrap of paper. Her fingers brushed it free and opened it slowly. The ink was smudged, the handwriting clumsy and rushed, but she could still read the words. Just one sentence. "Please don't separate us." That was it. No name, no explanation. Just a plea that somehow made Evelyn feel like her own soul was being spoken to. Her throat tightened again. She looked at the two animals, wondering who had left them, and why. All her instincts told her this wasn't an accident. Someone had cared enough to protect them, but not enough, or couldn't, to stay. Maybe they thought someone else would be kinder. Maybe they knew this bus stop had eyes like Evelyn's. As she sat in the cold with the box on her lap, a decision began forming deep in her chest. She didn't have much, not anymore. But maybe she had just enough warmth, enough space, enough love. She had no idea what the next hour would bring, let alone the next day. But one thing had become clear. She couldn't walk away. Not from this. She shifted her coat and wrapped it partly over the box to shield the cats from the cold. The kitten made a faint noise, more a sigh than a meow, and Evelyn gently stroked its head with one gloved finger. The adult cat blinked slowly, watching her movements with exhausted gratitude. She imagined them walking through the night, pushed out of somewhere warm, carrying each other as far as they could. The image made her heart ache. "You're not alone now," she whispered. Her voice cracked, soft but certain. "I've got you." And in that moment, something shifted inside her. An old part of her that had been asleep for years began to stir. As the snow started falling, soft and slow, Evelyn didn't notice the cold anymore. She sat alone at the bus stop with two fragile lives resting in her arms, and somehow she didn't feel so hollow. Her heart beat heavier, steadier. The box that had once symbolized abandonment now held the beginning of something new, something that might even resemble hope. She looked down at the cats and realized she hadn't saved them. Not really. Not yet. But just maybe. They were about to save her. Evelyn stood from the bench, the weight of the box pressing into her forearms, both heavier and more delicate than it had any right to be. The kitten barely moved now, and the older cat let out a faint, raspy sound, somewhere between a growl and a whimper. She glanced down the street, unsure where to go. Her apartment didn't allow pets. Management had made that clear when she first moved in after Frank's death. Still, the thought of leaving them behind never crossed her mind. Her feet started moving, slow but steady, like they had a direction even if her mind hadn't caught up. Every step reminded her she was carrying something on the edge of life, something fragile, and she had no time to waste. The streets were still mostly empty, dusted with a thin layer of snow that sparkled under the early morning light. Evelyn took a shortcut through an alley behind the bakery, ignoring the cold seeping into her shoes. Her heart pounded with urgency she hadn't felt in years. She remembered there was a vet 2 blocks away, a small independent clinic she passed on walks but never entered. The building had a crooked sign and hand-painted windows. She prayed it was open. She didn't know how much longer the kitten could hold on. Its breathing was so faint and its body so cold. Every time it exhaled, she feared it would be the last. "Just hold on," she whispered, her breath turning white in the air. When she reached the clinic, the lights were off. The sign on the door said it opened at 8. She looked at her watch, 7:22. Her pulse sank. She knocked anyway, then banged with more force, hoping someone was inside early. After a few agonizing moments, she turned back toward the bench by the sidewalk, trying to shield the box from the wind. As she sat, she noticed the older cat had moved its paw to tuck the kitten closer, despite its own shivering body. That image struck Evelyn again with brutal force. The selflessness, the instinct to protect, even while suffering. It reminded her of how Frank used to wrap a blanket around her shoulders first, even when he was the one coughing through chemo. She swallowed the lump in her throat and leaned her forehead against the box. A man in scrubs finally appeared inside, startled by the sight of her waiting. He unlocked the door and cracked it open. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, eyeing the box in her arms. Evelyn stood immediately and pushed past her nerves. "I think the little one's dying." Her voice was strained but clear. He opened the door wider and gestured her in without hesitation. Sighed, the warmth hit her like a wave. Her glasses fogged instantly, and the smell of antiseptic filled her nose. A younger woman, perhaps a vet tech, hurried over and carefully took the box from her hands. Evelyn's arms felt suddenly empty, and she realized how tightly she'd been holding them. They placed the box on a steel table and opened it gently. The technician's face changed instantly, eyes widening, jaw tightening. She scooped the kitten up with gloved hands and disappeared into the back without a word. The vet stayed behind, examining the older cat. "She's emaciated," he murmured. "Probably hasn't eaten in days. And look at this, burns on her paw pads. Frostbite, maybe." Evelyn stared in horror. The vet glanced up. "Where did you find them?" She explained haltingly about the bus stop, about the napkin and the note. The vet nodded grimly. Whoever left them knew they were out of options. This cat, she didn't just survive. She made a choice to stay alive long enough to keep that baby warm. Evelyn sat silently as they continued their work. Minutes passed, then longer. The clinic phone rang. Someone brought in a parrot in a cage, and a man came in with a limping dog. Life moved around her, but she couldn't stop thinking about the kitten. She had seen death before, slow, cruel, and quiet. But this felt different. This was a fight still happening, and for once, she wasn't just a bystander. When the tech returned, her expression was neutral. "We've got her stabilized," she said softly. "She's still very weak, but she's breathing on her own now." Evelyn felt her whole body exhale. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. They let her sit beside the recovery table where the kitten lay swaddled in a warm towel, connected to a tiny IV. The older cat was resting in a heated kennel nearby, her eyes half closed but alert. Evelyn reached through the bars and stroked her head gently. "You did good," she whispered. "You held on when it mattered." The cat didn't react much, but there was a softness in her gaze, a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. Evelyn sat back in the chair, heart full and uncertain. She was attached now. There was no denying it. But what came next? She asked the tech what would happen to the cats after treatment. The woman hesitated. "They'll go to the shelter," she said carefully. "But it's hard to place older cats and bonded pairs. Almost impossible." Evelyn felt a coldness return, not from the weather, but from the reality of what she'd just heard. These two had survived so much, stayed together through impossible odds, and now they'd be separated by procedure? By red tape? She looked at the box, now empty on the table, and remembered the note. "Please don't separate us." She whispered it aloud, almost involuntarily. The tech looked at her, surprised by the emotion in her voice. Evelyn stared at the cats, then at her hands, then back at the tech. Her throat was dry, her mind racing. She had no pet supplies. Her lease didn't allow animals. Her pension barely covered food and rent. And yet, there was no doubt left in her. She remembered the stillness in her apartment, the echo of footsteps that never returned. She remembered the nights spent praying for a reason to keep going. And now, two reasons were lying right in front of her. She stood up slowly, as if shedding the weight of indecision with each movement. "What would I have to do?" she asked quietly. "To take them home?" The vet returned with a clipboard. "It won't be easy," he said. "They'll need medical care, especially the little one. And you'll need to fill out adoption paperwork, get approval." Evelyn stopped him with a look. Not stern, not desperate, just clear. "Tell me what to do," she said. "I'll figure it out." In that moment, something changed in the room. The vet nodded slowly, and the tech smiled just slightly. It wasn't approval. It was recognition. They'd seen it before. That fire, that stubborn love. Evelyn had made her decision. She wasn't walking away. Not this time. Not from them. The adoption forms felt like a maze at first. So many boxes to check, disclosures to sign, and questions Evelyn hadn't thought about in years. Did she have any other pets? No. Any income beyond Social Security? No. Could she afford emergency care? She paused, then wrote, "I'll find a way." The tech, Megan, watched her without judgment. When Evelyn hesitated over the section about long-term care, Megan gently slid her a pamphlet for low-income pet support. "A lot of folks figure it out," she said softly. "You're not the first." Evelyn smiled faintly, her pen trembling as she signed the bottom line. "I just didn't think I'd still have something to fight for," she murmured. They let her visit the cats every day while the kitten remained under observation. The older one, now named Fern by the clinic staff, recovered faster than anyone expected. She was still thin and sore, but her strength returned steadily with warmth, food, and gentle care. The kitten, Evelyn had begun calling her Maple, was a different story. Her tiny body struggled to maintain temperature, and she barely opened her eyes. But each day, Evelyn arrived with a blanket tucked into her purse, placed it across her lap, and waited as long as they'd let her. Fern would crawl into her arms, purring faintly, and Evelyn would whisper stories to Maple, stories she hadn't told anyone in decades. She spoke of the farm where she and Frank had met, of the dog they once rescued who slept between them for 13 winters, of the miscarriage and the silence that followed. She cried sometimes, quietly, holding Fern and watching the steady rise and fall of Maple's belly. The staff learned not to interrupt her during those visits. There was something sacred in those hours, an old woman and two fragile creatures, healing each other in the simplest way possible, by showing up. One evening, just as she was preparing to leave, Maple stirred in her towel, lifted her head briefly, and gave a soft, unsteady meow. Evelyn gasped, then smiled through her tears. It was her first real sound since the day at the bus stop. Word about the rescue began to spread. A receptionist posted a photo on the clinic's Facebook page of Evelyn holding both cats in her lap. "The bus stop trio," the caption read. Hundreds of comments poured in, some from neighbors, others from strangers around the country. One woman wrote, "I don't know this lady, but she reminds me of my grandmother. Thank you for not looking away." Another offered to donate food. A local pet shop reached out to supply free litter and toys. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt seen, not pitied, not forgotten, but part of something again. When Maple was finally cleared to go home, Evelyn arrived at the clinic with a borrowed cat carrier and a second-hand coat she'd bought to protect them from the cold. She knelt beside their kennel, kissed the top of Maple's head and whispered, "We made it." Fern, as if understanding, rubbed against Evelyn's cheek. The vet gave final instructions. Soft food, regular check-ins, monitor for signs of relapse. Evelyn nodded through it all, committed. When she stepped back onto the sidewalk, the wind hit her hard, but she didn't flinch. The two cats nestled inside her coat like they belonged there, like they always had. Back at her apartment, she moved furniture to create a space for them. An old towel by the radiator, a plastic dish for water, a small box for litter. Her landlord, Mr. Hartley, called after the front desk saw her carrying the carrier. "Mrs. Carter, you know the lease doesn't allow animals." Evelyn took a breath and steadied her voice. "Then I'm asking for an exception." Silence on the other end. "They were abandoned in a shoebox," she added. "And I think maybe I was too." Hartley paused, then sighed. "Let's just call it a trial. Don't let 'em ruin the carpet." Evelyn thanked him, voice cracking with relief. She hung up, heart pounding. The days that followed weren't easy, but they were full. Maple needed feedings every few hours. Fern scratched the couch once and knocked a plant off the windowsill. Evelyn laughed, really laughed, for the first time since Frank's funeral. She found herself humming while washing dishes, talking to the cats like they were old friends. The silence that once haunted her apartment was now filled with the patter of paws and the soft rumble of purring. Even her neighbors noticed the change. Mrs. Liang upstairs brought over a spare scratching post, and the delivery boy left a note. "Saw the cats online. Hope they're doing okay." Evelyn began writing again, something she hadn't done since Frank got sick. Short letters, journal entries, notes addressed to no one in particular. In one, she wrote, "I thought I was done living. Now I'm just beginning again." She found herself looking forward to mornings, not because of the bus or the community center, but because Maple would paw at her face, hungry and full of life, and Fern would stretch across the foot of the bed like a sentry. Their presence turned time into something rich again, measured not by clocks but by care, by warmth, by moments that mattered. One cold evening, Evelyn sat in her worn recliner with both cats curled beside her. She looked out the window, snow falling gently, and realized something had shifted, subtly but undeniably. These two little lives had created an anchor in her days. She had been the one to find them, to carry them into warmth. But somewhere along the way, they had lifted her too, pulled her from the fog of grief into something new, something sacred. And as she drifted into sleep, one thought settled in her chest, quiet and sure. We saved each other. 3 months later, Evelyn's apartment no longer looked like the quiet corner of a widow's life. It was alive in every sense of the word. A cat tree stood by the window where the plants used to wilt. Toys dotted the floor like forgotten breadcrumbs of joy. Maple, now stronger and full of mischief, chased shadows along the hallway, pouncing and sliding across rugs with the confidence only the truly loved can possess. Fern preferred to perch above, watching the world with a protector's gaze, calm and steady. Evelyn moved among them with a rhythm that was no longer stiff or hollow. She had routines again, but this time they came with laughter, surprise, and a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. Every morning she brewed 2 cups of tea out of habit. One she still set on the table for Frank. But now Fern would curl up beside that empty mug as if standing in for someone no longer there, and Maple would tap her paw against the spoon, waiting for breakfast. The quiet moments weren't as heavy anymore. They were filled with presence instead of absence. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, wrapped in warmth and motion. Evelyn began walking farther, sometimes venturing into the park again. People stopped her now, not just to admire the cats who often rode in a carrier stroller, but to talk, to ask, to connect. One morning, the receptionist from the vet clinic called with a proposal. "There's a support group for older adults who've adopted rescues," she said. "Would you come share your story?" Evelyn hesitated, unsure if her words would matter. But then she thought of the woman she'd been that morning at the bus stop, how close she'd come to walking away. She agreed. The meeting room at the community center was warm, filled with folding chairs and strangers. Evelyn sat at the front, Fern asleep in her arms, Maple curled at her feet. She told the story in a soft voice, steady and simple. By the time she finished, half the room was in tears. Afterward, people lined up, not just to thank her, but to share their own stories. A man had lost his son and adopted a 3-legged dog. A woman said her parakeet helped her through chemo. There was healing in the room that day, quiet but real. Evelyn didn't realize she'd started something, but she had. The community center created a monthly event, Hearts with Paws. Seniors were matched with animals in need of companionship, not just adoption. Volunteers offered to deliver food, schedule vet appointments, and help navigate pet-friendly housing. Local shelters noticed the change. Adoption rates rose and waitlists shortened. One kind choice had rippled outward. Evelyn never asked to be the face of anything, but soon her story made it into the local newspaper. Then a regional magazine. A reporter came to interview her, and when asked why she did it, why she didn't walk away from a box on a bench, her answer was simple. "Because I knew what it felt like to be left behind." That quote stuck. It became the headline. And for days after the article ran, she received letters in the mail. Some with drawings from children, others with folded photos of lost pets, and a few with words like, "You gave me hope again." The impact reached her landlord, Mr. O. Hartley, who eventually rewrote the lease policy to allow cats for tenants over 65. "Call it a community health exception," he joked, though Evelyn could tell he meant every word. Other buildings followed. A city council member even invited her to speak at a policy meeting about elder loneliness and the benefits of companion animals. Evelyn chuckled, shaking her head. "I'm just a lady with 2 cats," she'd say. But that wasn't true anymore. She was a bridge between loss and love, between silence and song, between the forgotten and the found. Fern aged gracefully, still protective, still quiet, always watching Maple with a mother's pride. Maple grew fast and full of energy, though she never left Evelyn's side for long. She'd nap on her lap during old westerns or press against her ribs at night as if guarding Evelyn's heartbeat. They had become something whole together, each incomplete in their own way, but complete when near. Evelyn would sometimes pause during these quiet moments, her eyes misty but soft. "I thought I was keeping them alive," she'd whisper, "but they're the ones who woke me up." Small things carried deep meaning now. The sound of paws across the hardwood, the warmth of fur against her ankle, the meow that came exactly when she needed company. Evelyn began leaving her door slightly ajar so neighbors could stop in. And they did. Loneliness, it turned out, was more fragile than she thought. It shattered quickly when met with a shared moment or a purring welcome. One day she opened a letter from a local shelter. "In honor of your kindness, we've created the Fern and Maple Fund to keep bonded animals together." She cried holding that paper, her hands trembling with something close to joy. On the anniversary of the day at the bus stop, Evelyn returned there with Fern in a sling and Maple riding shotgun in her old canvas tote. She sat quietly on the same bench. The street was still cold, the sky just as gray, but everything else had changed. She looked down at the cats, now her family, and whispered, "You saved me too." No one passing by would have guessed what had begun there one winter morning. But Evelyn knew. The pain hadn't vanished, and Frank was still gone. But the emptiness no longer echoed. In its place was life, fragile and fierce, curled beside her in a shoebox of memory. She didn't just save a cat that day, she saved a family. And in doing so, she found something she hadn't even realized was missing. Not just love, but purpose. A reason to wake up, to open the door, to let life back in. Sometimes redemption doesn't roar. Sometimes it meows from a cardboard box. Evelyn Carter's life didn't end in grief. It restarted on a frozen bench, with a heartbeat no bigger than a teacup. And from that moment on, nothing was ever the same.